Good morning. I'm going to tell you all a story this morning. I want you to know it'll be hard to do. There'll be tears, and somebody may have to get up and wipe my eyes, but it's all true, and God is alive and well, and you will see Him as I speak. First, I want to start with where I was raised. It was a small town in central Illinois. My parents were both heavy drinkers. They were abusive. They were self-destructive. They both had numerous affairs. Two of my three sisters and I were sexually molested by our father. One spring morning, Mom and Dad were fighting again, and suddenly came out of the house. Dad had packed Mom one small suitcase after 16 years of marriage, threw her in the car, and drove off. And when he came home a few hours later, he said, "Girls, your mother has moved to San Diego." I was 11 years old, and I didn't think I'd ever see her again. Though I was the second child, I became the mom figure. I already had one child, Bobby, who's here today. She's actually my youngest sister, but I raised her, and she called me, and still does sometimes, little mommy. As I learned how to cook, we had repetitive meals. I didn't know how to cook much at 11. But I did all the shopping, I did all the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, combing hair and washing faces. Life went on, and Dad had a long string of girlfriends. He had a son he never acknowledged. And eventually he had a new wife. I was 15, and I thought I was doing pretty good without her. And she turned into the stepmother from Cinderella. There were 4 of us girls, and she had 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl. The youngest 3 were still in diapers. Bobby was probably 11 when this happened. I was 15. And Mary had us constantly cleaning the house. We'd clean the house when we got up before school. We'd come home and we'd clean the house. We'd have supper and we'd clean the house. And then we'd finally go to bed. When I was 16, Mary told Dad that her dead grandmother had appeared to her in a vision, and we were to move to the Bottoms. Of course, y'all know what Bottoms are, but this was up in Illinois. So Dad quit his job at the power plant, bought an old school bus, and made it into a camper. We had bunk beds all around the back, and most of the younger kids doubled up in a bed. The baby, my older sister had had a baby. Kathy was 7 months old when we moved down there. For heat in the winter, we had a kerosene stove that held a gallon of kerosene. And when that burned out, that was it. It's time to get up. We went down into the Bottoms a quarter mile on a steep, muddy hill. It was the end of the world. I never thought anything would ever come. We had no electricity, no running water. We dug a hole and we built an elm log outhouse. Now that's an experience. And we dug another hole, and that was supposed to be our well. We had a milk cow, and we milked and churned butter twice a day. We also had a calf, a sheep, a hog, a few chickens, and several horses. I quit school, but the younger kids had to go. We would get them up every morning, get them dressed, load them on horses, and carry them up the hill to meet the school bus. That was the only way to get out. We lived that way until I enlisted in the Navy, and I turned 18 in boot camp. We had lived almost a year and a half in the bottoms. While I was in the Navy, I went home twice. I actually asked permission to do things, and my dad laughed and said, "You're an adult now." I was like, okay. I got transferred to Memphis in December of '75, and my family moved without telling me. While I was in the Navy, I went to hospital corps school, which is much like an LPN. At 2 different duty stations, I was raped 3 times total. My lifestyle began to be what my mother's had been. A lot of alcohol, a lot of men. And no matter how many times I slept with somebody, I was so alone. I met a man in a bar. He was also in the Navy. He was 15 years older than me and a lot like my dad. And I married him. We spent all of our time and all of our money in the bars. Got out of the Navy, moved to Springfield, Missouri. I had a job. Bill was overqualified for anything. He found a bar called Barbara's Beer Garden. After a while there, we decided to go out to San Diego where my mother lived. I think I figured out why Dad left Mom. I didn't like her either. It wasn't long after we got there that I became pregnant. I had Carrie, and then Dad, and Mary, and the 5 remaining children moved to San Diego. And we shared a 3-bedroom condo for a short time. And it was very tight. Mary took over everything. And soon, her dead grandmother said we were all supposed to move to Louisiana, where she had family that lived like the Amish, and we'd be safe from the world there. We moved down to Louisiana. We camped for 2 weeks going across country. We camped another 2 weeks in Spearsville while we looked for jobs and a house to rent. And Bill found a bar. After a DUI, we moved back to the Memphis area. We were right back in the bars with a little girl. I decided I didn't want to live that way anymore. And I told Bill that I was leaving him. And he told me, he said, "Oh, you'll either be back in 2 weeks or you'll be dead." I didn't go back. And I left my daughter because I'd rather be dead than go through what we had been through in 7 years. When I left Bill, I went to work as an LPN at Methodist Central Hospital in Memphis. I was wild still. I worked 3 to 11 shift. That way I wouldn't drink as much because the bar closed at 2. One day I was sitting at the desk and I saw this man walking down the hall. And I leaned over, and the nurse I was working with, I said, "Ralph, you see that guy? I'd like to go out with him." I never dated people in the hospital. They knew I was wild anyway. They didn't need to be a part of it. And Ralph said, "Oh, haven't you met him? That's Earl. He's the new chaplain." Never mind. Not going there. No. Don't want to go out with that, huh? Well, Earl was a bit pushy. As a chaplain, he stayed in an apartment just walking distance to the hospital. So he worked days and I worked evenings. can you take your lunch break or your break now? And I'd say, well, let me check and see. And okay, go ahead. So we'd eat supper together at the hospital. Then he'd call later and say, can you take your break? So we'd go down, we'd have ice cream in the hospital cafeteria. Every day I worked, I spent time with Earl. He asked me out a year after we met. And I yelled at him. I had told him things over that year, just trying to shock him. You know, it didn't work. He asked and I said no, and he asked and I said no, and he asked and I said okay, and he wanted my phone number. No, that's right, I'll meet you in the hospital parking lot. Yeah, that was it, the hospital parking lot. It's as close as you're getting to where I live. And when we came back to my car after a dinner and just sitting and talking out near the airport in Memphis, he asked me, could he kiss me? No. I was a very sexual person. He was a preacher. And I had to protect that. He continued to go out, visit me at the hospital, took me home to meet his father. A little side point here. His dad teased him the next day because he'd never seen Earl out with anybody but this nun he worked with. And so he said, I was beginning to think you weren't ever going to get married. Yeah. So anyway, 5 months after our first date, we married in Memphis. Bobby came, stood up for me. Carrie was there. We looked forward to our first appointment. 6 months later, we came to Benton, Kentucky. Well, God does have a sense of humor. Benton's a dry county. Carrie came to live with us while we were at Benton, under threats from her natural father. We worked through it. We began to build a family. And it wasn't good. 4 years after we married, I went on a walk to Emmaus. I skipped something you have to know first. When Earl asked me to marry him, and I said yes, I made an appointment to be baptized. I didn't say I believed. I thought a preacher's wife should be baptized. Isn't that what you're supposed to be? So here I am on the walk to Emmaus with all this still in me and believing that nobody could truly love me. If you haven't been on a walk, when it's your time to go. God healed me that weekend. I heard people tell their testimony, and it was sometimes like mine. I realized that God did love me, and that I wasn't worthless or useless or unlovable. Earl and I got involved in spiritual warfare in Marshall County. It was deep. We would find strongholds under bridges, pray and anoint and tear down. I started reading books, Christian books even, and my faith grew. I had attended several spiritual gift workshops. And everybody said I should be in the healing ministry. I figured that's because I'm a nurse, right? Well, I finally, after my walk, came to accept that God had called me to a healing ministry. And I was talking to my cousin, Bob Wiley. Some of you know him. And I told him, I said, I think that this is real. And he looked at me and he said, Berta, you have to be healed before you can heal. I didn't have anything I thought needed healed at that point. I thought I was doing pretty good. On December 30th, 1990, I had a dream. Bob Wiley, this man that is my cousin, was going to be in an accident on Highway 80 on New Year's Day. We called. He promised not to be on the highway on New Year's Day. So January 1st, 1991, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I had a wreck. There are two strange points here. First of all, Bob is named Robert Wiley. My maiden name is Roberta Wiley. Bob was on that road, and I was on that road. And if it hadn't been for Bob, I probably wouldn't have made it because nobody came to see if we were alive. Bob got in the car with me, and he held my head up, and he asked me, what can I do so you can pray? God told him that he would see me before I died. So Earl thought that I was going to die. And he prayed and prayed and prayed. And eventually he said, God, I can't take it that way. I'll take her any way you give her to me. And God told him, okay, remember your promise. And God told him that I was paralyzed. While I was in the hospital, I had 4 surgeries. I had a halo brace. I don't know if you've all ever seen one. It's screwed into your head, and it's got these upright bars. You can't move anything. I had a tracheostomy. I was on a ventilator. I had a feeding tube. I had bed sores. I was never alone, though. People were praying for me all around Marshall County, McCracken County, all the Emmaus community, family, friends all over the country. My Emmaus group sent me a banner, Philippians 1:6. He who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it in the day of Christ Jesus. Yeah, right. What's he going to do with this? I couldn't move anything. Bobby came and stayed with Carrie and visited with me in rehab. My first clear memory is Bobby sitting by my hospital bed crying. And I told her that it's all right. I'll walk again because God already said he was going to heal me. My next memory was of Carrie. I didn't want her to see me. I thought she'd be afraid. Earl got me to let her come by telling me that he told her a whole lot worse stuff than what's really there. And she was okay. So he brought her in and held her over me. And she kissed me. And she said, I love you, Mommy. That made such a difference in the way I felt about my life. My baby was still okay. I also, as I became more alert, got control of my care. I was a nurse after all. I got them to change frequencies on tests, quit waking me up every 6 hours. After I'd been in the hospital for about 3 months, the doctors said that I would be bedridden, ventilator dependent, and a vegetable, and Earl was too young to be saddled with an invalid wife. Earl heard our pastor, John Jones, say, "In sickness and in health, keeping thee only unto her, until you both shall," I've messed it up, haven't I, Agnes? Till death do us part. Thank you. Earl didn't let the doctors decide when my life ended. That was God's decision. I was transferred just a few days after that to rehab in Atlanta. I was in isolation because I had MRSA in my trach. I was sitting in my room every day by myself, staring out the window or sleeping. Well, it was springtime, and outside that window was all these beautiful young trees. But there was one that wasn't getting beautiful. It looked dead, and it just didn't have buds, didn't have growth, nothing. So I told everybody they should cut that tree down so I didn't have to look at it. That went on for a couple of weeks. One morning there were buds on that tree. And God said, "It's alive, and so are you." What I had said about that tree was that it was ugly and useless, not worth saving. Isn't that what the doctor said about me? The first time I looked in a mirror and saw my halo full force, I called it my crown of thorns. All I could see looking up were 2 screws in my forehead in a circle attached to it. So I had my crown of thorns. That Easter, I got to go to a worship service on Good Friday. And my crown of thorns was removed the day his was put in. Every evening at rehab, we would read The Upper Room and Our Daily Bread. Bobby doesn't like to read out loud. We tried with her holding it up for me to read. That wasn't working too well. So she'd close the door and she'd read the devotions. And every time she read, something had happened that day that related to what this devotion spoke to. I want you to know that in October of 91, Bobby accepted the Lord. After I'd been in rehab for just 3 months, I asked the doctors to let me go home. I wasn't making any progress. I couldn't sit up, couldn't hold my head up. There was so much to learn to take care of me. Earl and I both had to go to classes. We had to be tested. We had to do practical stuff, like they put me in the floor and said, "Okay, Earl, pick her up and put her in her chair." And so we learned how to do emergency stuff as well as everyday stuff. My doctor finally agreed to let me go home. And he said, "You have to promise that you won't give up." Well, I promised because, God's going to heal me that year. Wasn't no big deal. Went home. Life was different. One of my first visitors came in while Earl was feeding me chicken and dumplings and looked at Earl. "Oh, can I feed her?" That was enough right there. I completely shut down. I didn't want to be around people. I couldn't stay by myself, though. So Earl took me everywhere he went. I've been to more pastors' conferences and preachers' meetings than any pastor's wife in this conference, I guarantee you that. A year after my accident, not only was I not healed, but we found out the bones in my neck had not fused. So I had to have surgery. We packed up and went to Cleveland, Ohio, and had my head cut off, really. They went across the front and took out bone chips. They went up and down in the back and took out more bone chips and put in splints, bone splints, and wires to hold my head together. It still took so long to recover. Earl, we moved to a different church, and Earl asked my Sunday school teacher to ask me to teach one Sunday a month. So I said yes, and I did it, and I thought, well, I can do this. That's all right. Well, at that church, it ended up every Sunday I was teaching. I started in prayer ministry over the telephone. I had a Bible study in the parsonage. Then in March of 2000, we went back down to Shepherd, and they didn't do any tests. They looked at us and they talked to us, and they said, oh, you could write the book. There was nothing that we could do to make it better than it was. We were it. So we had the manual down pat. But I was still so angry. The way people reacted to me. I'm so sorry. You poor thing. And please don't pet me. I get the spirit of slap, Earl says. As my faith grew, my anger and depression subsided, although they can both show up anytime. But today I focus on God. I share my love for Him. I'm open and I'm honest. I still have to deal many times a day with the response of people. I can go to the mall and go in the store by myself, and people are like, what is she doing here? Is she by herself? I keep my testimony typed out and in my backpack. I hand it out all the time. And if you want to know something about somebody with a disability, ask. Don't be afraid. But if you don't really want the answer, you better not ask me. When we came to Concord 4.5 years ago, the pastor parish committee asked me, what would you like to do? I'd like to stay busy. Okay. Within a week after getting here, I had been invited to do several different things with this congregation. From the United Methodist Women to a women's Bible study on Thursday night, teaching Sunday school. I'm a certified lay speaker, and I can teach the course. I've got certified to do that a couple years ago. I love to tell my story. No matter where I go. I was at a doctor's office a couple days ago, and the doctor didn't ask me to squeeze his hands, and I said, thank you. Do you know this is the first time I've been in this clinic that the doctor didn't ask me to squeeze their hands? And he looked at me, and when I shared my testimony with this doctor, I shared my testimony that day with a woman out in the waiting room and one of the nurses in the back. I don't get negative reactions anymore. I think they see me in the mall and they go, whoops, here comes Berta again. And if you're sitting on a bench and you're not doing anything, I might stop and talk to you. But I would tell you what God has done in my life. He has raised me up. He has given me a life I thought was impossible when I was a little girl. I didn't think I'd grow up. When I was 18, I didn't think I'd be 21. When I was 21, it was just day by day. And even after Earl and I married, I was lonely. I couldn't relate. I have shared my home with Girl Scouts to come in and see how somebody with a disability lives. Kids are the greatest. We'd be in a parking lot and they'll be staring at the lift or see somewhere. What is that? Why are you in a stroller? You know, and I teach these little kids. I teach the parents. But I never teach without saying something about God. I'm often told that I'm an inspiration. Do you know what I say? My disability is just more obvious than yours. That's all it is. I sit in a wheelchair. If I could walk, I wouldn't be any more healed than I am right now. In 2006, I received 2 special, one was an award, I'm not sure what you call the other one. The Memphis Conference recognized me as an evangelist. I've received the Harry Denman Award for Evangelism. I was the first female to ever get it. And I was the first disabled person to ever get it. But on the same day I got that, I was told that I was the new chairman of the Disabilities Committee for the conference. And you got my email. No, I didn't get your email. I would encourage anybody who has not experienced wheelchairs to sit in one for a day. Try to go to the store. I don't know which one I'm stronger at right now, the disabilities or the evangelism, so they generally come together too. I have to tell you, my sister in the back is a big part of my pride and joy, just like she was born to me. And when I needed her, she gave up her life and came and took care of my daughter. I ask that you all be praying for Bobby. She recently had breast cancer. She's had 4 surgeries. Is having surgery this next Wednesday. And I can't imagine not having her. Our parents are gone. Our grandparents are gone. The oldest daughter is gone. We're it. As I go about my daily life, I want everybody I meet to see Jesus. I wear this cross every day. I've been asked, why do you wear a cross? Have you ever thought about that? Why do you wear a cross? Is it just a piece of jewelry? Is it an idol? To me, it's a reminder. My Jesus died on that cross for me. No matter how bad I've been, no matter how good I am, He is mine and I am His. We pray every day for my healing. We give thanks every day for my healing. And no, He hasn't healed my spinal cord. In fact, it's worse. My spinal cord severed at C4. I should not be able to move anything but my head. And you've seen me raise my hands. I had a mitral valve prolapse for 10 years. God healed it. I've had so many things. Physical healed. But I think the biggest healing, the best thing I've had, is my spiritual healing. Because I was so confused and so lost. I teach now every Sunday. I help lead a women's Bible study. I teach basic lay speaking. I write for the newsletter. I've written a book. If Earl hadn't started me with a computer 10 years ago, I sort of left that out. He got me a little computer, and he said, keep a journal. So I'd write some stuff out. So slow to type with a little stick here. And Earl would come home, and I'd delete real fast because I was ashamed. I didn't want him to read that. Well, God changed a lot. He butted in, to say the least. He started keeping me awake at night and telling me all kinds of things. And I'd get up and I'd write furiously till I got it all down. Then I'd lay back in my chair and go to sleep. And I'd go to bed and God'd wake me up. And I'd listen to him dictate. And when I went back and read after the months of him doing that, it was stuff I didn't remember until I read it. And I was like, that's just really strange. But it hurt too, because a lot of the things from my childhood I don't remember. Bobby has no memory. She struggles every day with maybe this or maybe that happened. Can I ask y'all a question? Have you ever been homesick? I have a friend who, when we were in Benton, she saw me 5 days a week. And when we moved to Tennessee, she moved to West Virginia. Well, she had written me a letter, and she was describing how much she missed everybody. And her grandmothers had died in Chicago, and her parents were here, and her sisters were there. And she was out in West Virginia, didn't know anybody out there. She was homesick. As she described her thoughts and her feelings about that, I thought, you know what? I've been homesick for so long. Sitting outside a bar, waiting for my husband to please have a last beer so we can go home. Hanging my head out the window in the rain. God, I just want to go home. And I didn't know him then. I just want to go home. I didn't understand it because I didn't have a home with my parents. I didn't have family around. What was the home I wanted? That was Jesus. Once I accepted that He, my life in Him, is home, they can put me in any parsonage in the world, and it's not going to matter. When we came here, I was home. The day before we came here, I was home. I can move. I can do anything that God calls me to do. I'll never be alone again. Not one time, not one moment. Today I want to encourage you to be bold in your faith. Tell your story. Write it out. Hand it out like I do. People get tired. Well, it's in the backpack here. Write it out. It doesn't have to be long or short. Or just write what is your story. Even if you're not going to hand it out. No one can argue with what God has done for you. I'm to the end, and the guys aren't here for the band. Y'all remember that banner that I told you about earlier? What did it say? He who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it in the day of Christ Jesus. That's on my tombstone. I've got a lot of rocks from Earl. I've got diamonds, I've got emeralds, I've got resin, I've got granite, and we're ready to go when it's time. We're ready to just go home. We're going to sing now the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. Pay attention to these words in the chorus. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All that I have needed, Thy hand has provided. Great is Thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me and you. God bless you.
Thank you, Berta. Let's get our hymn books out, page 140.